The alarm on my console screams before I even understand what it is warning me about. My name is Vorik Thal Sen, 3rd Officer of the Vareth Dominion, a warship of the Grand Vurith Empire, and in this moment, every light on my bridge has turned red. My hands freeze over the controls. Around me, other officers are shouting orders, but none of it makes sense, because the thing that triggered the alarm is not a weapon, not a fleet, not an enemy signal. It is one small ship, a single vessel, dull gray, scratched, and by every reading on our system, harmless. Our sensors classify it instantly as a Tier 4 civilization make, the kind of ship we would normally not even bother scanning twice. And yet the alarm will not stop. Something about it has confused our detection grid so badly that the ship keeps appearing and disappearing on our screen, as if it cannot decide whether it exists. I look at Commander Yeltrin, who has served on this ship longer than I have been alive, and even he looks unsettled. "Identify it," he orders the sensor officer. "I am trying, sir," she replies, her voice tight. The signal keeps shifting. One moment it reads as unarmed, the next moment it reads as something we do not have a category for. We are patrolling the outer edge of contested space, far from the heart of the Empire, in a region we call the Long Silence, because for centuries, nothing of importance has happened here. Until now, the unknown ship drifts closer, without any urgency, without any attempt to hide. It does not accelerate. It does not power weapons, if it even has any. It simply moves toward us, the way a traveler walks toward a door, calm and unafraid. "Should we fire a warning shot?" asks the weapons officer. Commander Yeltrin raises a hand to stop him. "Not yet. Let us see what they want first." I find myself holding my breath. In my years of service, I have seen dozens of first encounters with new species. Most of them tremble. Most of them beg. A ship this small, facing a warship like ours, should be radiating fear across every channel we can read. But there is nothing. No panic. No pleading. Just silence. And a strange, steady calm that feels almost insulting. Then the comm system crackles to life on its own. "Hello, Vareth Dominion," says a voice, warm and unhurried, speaking our language with perfect pronunciation. "My name is Ethan Cole. I am requesting docking permission." The bridge goes completely silent. I glance at the linguistics officer beside me, and her face has gone pale. "Sir," she says slowly, "that language module took our scholars 11 years to develop for diplomatic use. This voice just spoke it like someone born speaking it." Commander Yeltrin leans toward the comm. "This is Commander Yeltrin of the Grand Vurith Empire. You are in restricted space. Identify your origin and your intentions." There is a short pause, and then the voice returns, still calm, still almost friendly. "I am from a planet called Earth. My intentions are simple. I am transporting supplies to a research outpost 2 systems from here. I did not expect to be stopped, but I understand you have questions. I am happy to answer them." I do not understand why, but something about the way he says this bothers me more than if he had threatened us. There is no fear in his voice. Not the practiced fearlessness of a soldier hiding weakness, but something else entirely. Something that sounds like simple honesty. "Bring the ship in," Commander Yeltrin says at last. "Full scans, full escort. I want eyes on every inch of that vessel." As the small ship drifts into position beside us, I study it through the viewport. It looks almost embarrassing next to our warship, patched in places with metal that does not match, its hull covered in small dents and marks that suggest years of hard use rather than careful maintenance. If I did not know better, I would assume this ship had been assembled from spare parts by someone with more determination than skill. And yet my instruments cannot settle on a single reading for it. The mass sensors report one number, then another, then a third, as though the ship refuses to stay still even when it is not moving. The energy signature flickers between readings that suggest a primitive engine and readings that suggest something far beyond our own reactors, sometimes within the same second. "This does not make sense," mutters the sensor officer beside me. "It is like the ship is 2 things at once." I write my first report at my station, describing the encounter in careful, measured words, because I know that whatever I say will be reviewed by officers far more senior than myself. I call the ship modest. I call the pilot polite. I use the word ordinary more than once, because I want to believe it, because it is easier to believe than the alternative. But even as I type it, doubt creeps into my mind. When the boarding party finally opens the airlock, I am part of the escort, standing at attention with my hand near my sidearm, though I do not expect to need it. The doors slide open with a soft hiss, and there he is. Ethan Cole is unremarkable to look at. Medium height, plain clothing, dark hair, a calm expression on his face that would not look out of place greeting an old friend. He carries no visible weapon. He does not raise his hands in surrender, nor does he act with any hostility. He simply steps forward and offers a small nod, as though this is a routine inspection he has been through 100 times before. "Thank you for allowing me aboard," he says, looking around at the armed escort surrounding him without the slightest flicker of concern. "I know this must seem unusual to you." Commander Yeltrin studies him closely. "You speak our language fluently. You approached a warship without fear. Explain yourself." Ethan smiles, and it is a strange, gentle smile, the kind that makes me feel as though he understands something none of us do. "I learned your language from listening to your transmissions on my way here. As for fear, I suppose I have learned there is usually more to gain from conversation than from running." "Your ship," I say, before I can stop myself. "Our scans cannot agree on what it is." He turns to look at me, and for a moment his eyes seem to hold a quiet amusement. "That is because it is not built the way you expect things to be built," he replies simply. "We do not always build things so they make sense to instruments. Sometimes we build things so they simply work." I do not understand what he means. Not yet, but something about the sentence settles into my mind like a splinter, small and impossible to ignore. Commander Yeltrin orders him escorted to a secure chamber for questioning, and orders our engineering teams to begin a full inspection of the human vessel. Ethan Cole does not protest. He walks calmly beside the guards, glancing occasionally at the corridors of our ship with quiet curiosity, as though he is the one conducting the inspection rather than being subjected to one. I return to the bridge, my mind circling around the encounter like a moth around a flame. In all my years of service, I have interrogated pirates, negotiated with hostile factions, and stood face to face with creatures twice my size and far more aggressive in temperament. None of them unsettled me the way this ordinary-looking human does, simply by being calm. Later that night, in the private quiet of my quarters, I review the sensor logs again, hoping to find some explanation, some simple answer that will let me file this encounter away as unremarkable. Instead, I find contradiction after contradiction. The ship's hull material registers as 3 different substances depending on which instrument reads it. Its interior temperature, according to our scans, is somehow both freezing and warm at the same time, as if 2 separate environments exist within the same walls. I remember something my mentor once told me, early in my career. She said that when the universe behaves strangely, it usually means our instruments are broken, or our understanding is. I do not think our instruments are broken. I close the file and sit in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the ship around me, and for the first time in a long while, I feel something I have not felt since I was a young cadet standing before the vastness of space for the first time. I feel small. The next morning, Commander Yeltrin summons me to his office, and I know immediately from his expression that something has happened during the night. "The engineering teams cannot make sense of the human ship," he says without preamble. "Every test they run gives them a different result. They say it is like trying to measure smoke." "What do you want me to do, sir?" He studies me for a long moment. "You seem to have made an impression on our guest. He has asked to speak with you directly." I blink in surprise. "Me, sir? Why would he ask for me?" "I do not know," Yeltrin admits, and there is something almost uneasy in his voice, an emotion I have rarely heard from him in all my years serving under his command. "But I want you to go and listen. Listen carefully, Vorik. I have a feeling that whatever this human tells you may be more important than anything our instruments can measure. As I walk toward the detention chamber where Ethan Cole waits, I feel the weight of that instruction settle over me. Whatever is happening here, whatever confusion has gripped our scanners and unsettled our engineers, I sense that it is only the beginning. The corridor lights flicker briefly as I pass, and somewhere deep in the ship, an alarm sounds for half a second before falling silent again, as though correcting itself. I pause, waiting for someone to explain it over the comm, but no explanation comes. I continue walking, my footsteps echoing against the metal floor, and for the first time since joining the Verith Dominion, I find myself afraid not of an enemy fleet, not of hostile weapons, but of understanding too little about something that should have been simple. When I reach the chamber door, I take a breath, straighten my uniform, and step inside, unaware that the conversation waiting for me will change everything I thought I knew about the galaxy, and about the quiet, unassuming species we have just discovered, floating on the edge of our empire. The door slides shut behind me with a soft click, and Ethan Cole looks up, his expression calm, almost welcoming, as if he has been waiting for this moment all along. "Officer Vorik," he says gently, "thank you for coming. I think it is time we talked honestly about what your instruments are struggling to explain." I take the seat across from him, the metal chair cold beneath me, and for a long moment neither of us speaks. He watches me with the same calm patience he showed on the bridge, as though time means something different to him than it does to me. "Our engineers cannot agree on what your ship is made of," I say finally, deciding that honesty might be the fastest way through this conversation. The hull registers as 3 different materials. The temperature readings contradict themselves. Even the mass of the vessel seems to shift, depending on which instrument we use. Ethan nods slowly, as though this is not surprising to him at all. "That sounds about right," he says. "Your instruments are built to measure things that follow a single, consistent set of rules. My ship was not built that way." "Then how was it built?" I ask. He leans back, folding his hands together, and for a moment he looks less like a prisoner and more like a teacher preparing to explain something to a curious student. "Where I come from, we did not discover one grand theory of the universe and build everything from it. We built things in pieces, using different ideas that did not always agree with each other, because we needed solutions faster than we could develop perfect understanding. Sometimes an engineer would build a system based on one theory, and another engineer would build a different system based on a completely different theory, and somehow, when we put them together, the whole thing worked, even though neither engineer could fully explain why." I frown, trying to make sense of this. "That sounds unstable, dangerous." "It often was," he admits, and there is a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps memory, perhaps something else. "We lost a great deal learning that way, but we also learned to build things that could survive contradictions, redundant systems, overlapping solutions. If one part fails, another part, built on a completely different principle, often keeps working anyway." I think of the sensor logs from the night before, the flickering readings that seem to belong to 2 different objects at once, and something about his explanation settles uncomfortably into place. "You are saying your ship works because it does not need to make sense," I say slowly. "I am saying," he replies, "that my ship works because it was never built to satisfy a single explanation. It was built to survive, no matter which explanation turned out to be true." Before I can respond, the door opens, and Commander Yeltrin steps inside, flanked by 2 of our senior engineers. Their faces are drawn and tired, the look of people who have spent the entire night confronting something they cannot understand. "Commander," Ethan says politely, offering a small nod, "I imagine your teams have had an interesting night." Yeltrin does not return the pleasantry. "Explain to me," he says, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration, "why my engineers opened a panel on your ship, expecting to find a power core, and instead found 3 separate systems, each claiming to be the primary source of energy, none of them agreeing with the others." Ethan's expression remains calm, almost apologetic, because all 3 of them are the primary source. Depending on the situation, he says simply. If one fails, another takes over. If two fail, the third compensates. It is not elegant, Commander, but it means the ship rarely stops working entirely, even when parts of it are broken. One of the engineers, a stern woman named Hessa, who has served the Empire's technical corps for over 20 years, steps forward with visible frustration on her face. That is not how engineering works, she says firmly. A ship needs one coherent design, otherwise you introduce conflict, inefficiency, waste. You are not wrong, Ethan replies, and I notice he does not argue the point, only offers a gentle correction. It is inefficient, it is wasteful, but it is also very hard to stop completely, because there is no single point where, if you break it, everything else breaks with it. Hessa opens her mouth to argue further, but Yeltrin raises a hand to silence her. Show us, he says instead. If your ship is truly built this way, prove it. Allow our engineers full access to your systems. Let them test what you are telling us. Ethan considers this for a moment, then nods. I will allow it, on one condition. Whatever your teams find, I ask that you record it honestly, even if it does not fit neatly into your understanding of engineering. I have found that people often try to force strange results into familiar shapes, and in doing so, they miss the truth entirely. Yeltrin agrees, and over the following hours, I am given permission to accompany the engineering team back to the human vessel, curious to see for myself what Ethan Cole has described. The interior of the ship is far more cramped than our warship, with narrow corridors and equipment that looks at first glance almost crude. Wires run alongside polished conduits. Panels that appear hand-welded sit beside components so precisely fitted they seem machine-perfect. It is as though two entirely different levels of craftsmanship exist side by side, without any apparent conflict. Hessa runs her scanner over one such panel, her brow furrowed in concentration. This section, she says, reads as advanced alloy, similar in strength to our own hull plating, perhaps even stronger in certain configurations, but it sits directly beside this section here, which reads as scrap metal, barely stronger than raw ore. May I? I ask, and she steps aside to let me look. I run my hand along the seam between the two materials, and I can feel it, a faint, almost imperceptible difference in texture, but nothing that should explain such a dramatic difference in strength. And yet, when Hessa strikes the weaker-looking section gently with a diagnostic tool, it does not crack or bend the way it should. It holds, absorbing the impact and passing the force along the seam into the stronger material beside it. It is not that the weak material is secretly strong, Hessa mutters, almost to herself. It is that the whole structure has been designed to share the burden between different materials, so that no single weak point can be exploited without the entire structure compensating. I think back to Ethan's words, redundant systems, overlapping solutions. We move deeper into the ship, past a small living area where personal items are scattered with the casual disorder of someone who has lived aboard for a long time, and into what appears to be the primary engineering bay. Here, the contradictions become even more apparent. 3 distinct engine cores hum quietly, each built on what our scanners identify as entirely different principles of energy generation. This one, says another engineer, a younger man named Petrick, pointing to the first core, operates on a principle similar to our own reactors, though far less efficient. This one, he continues, moving to the second, appears to draw energy from some kind of controlled instability, something our physics considers too dangerous to sustain for long periods. And this one, he finishes, staring at the third core with visible unease, I genuinely cannot classify. The readings suggest it should not function at all, and yet it clearly does. I stare at the 3 cores, humming quietly in their housings, each one supporting the ship in its own strange, contradictory way, and I feel the same unsettling sensation I felt the night before in my quarters. Not fear of an enemy, but fear of not understanding, fear of standing at the edge of something far larger than myself. Why build a ship this way? I ask Petrick, though I suspect I already know part of the answer. Why not simply choose the most efficient system and use it consistently? Petrick shakes his head slowly, because if you only have one system, and that system fails, you have nothing left. But if you have three systems, built on three different ideas, the chance that all three fail at once becomes extremely small. It is not the smartest way to build a ship. It might be the safest. We return to the bridge hours later, our reports filled with contradictions that refuse to resolve themselves, and I find Commander Yeltrin standing quietly at the viewport, staring out at the small, unremarkable human vessel drifting beside our warship. "What do you make of it, Vorik?" he asks without turning around. I consider my answer carefully before speaking. "I believe," I say slowly, "that we have been measuring the wrong thing, sir. We have been trying to determine how advanced their technology is, compared to ours. But I do not think that is the right question anymore." "Then what is the right question?" I hesitate, gathering my thoughts. I think the right question is not how advanced their technology is, but how difficult it would be to stop. Yeltrin is silent for a long moment, and when he finally turns to face me, I see something in his expression I have never seen from him before, not in all my years of service. Uncertainty. "Draft a full report," he says quietly. "Everything we have found, everything Ethan Cole has told us. I want this sent to the regional command immediately. If what you are suggesting is true, this is no longer a matter for a single warship to handle." That night, as I sit at my station composing the report, I find myself pausing more often than I expect, searching for the right words to describe something my own training has never prepared me to explain. I write about the three engine cores, the shifting hull readings, the strange redundancy built into every system we have examined. I write about Ethan Cole's calm explanation, his quiet insistence that his people did not build technology to be understood, only to survive. And as I write, I cannot shake the feeling that somewhere far beyond the edge of our empire, there are more ships like this one, more calm, unassuming pilots speaking our language with perfect ease, drifting quietly toward borders they do not seem to fear at all. I finish the report and send it, knowing that by morning it will have reached officers far more powerful than Commander Yeltrin, and that whatever happens next will no longer be something I can control. I only hope, as I finally allow myself to rest, that the Empire is ready for the answer to the question I have just asked. Morning arrives with a summons I did not expect. Commander Yeltrin calls me to his office before the first shift bell has even sounded, and when I arrive, I find him standing beside a secure channel, its indicator light glowing a steady, serious blue. "Regional Command has responded already," he tells me, and his voice carries a strange mixture of relief and worry. "They want more information before they decide anything. Specifically, they want to understand the reasoning behind human technology, not just the results. You spent time with Ethan Cole. They want you to continue those conversations and to bring back answers, not just observations." I nod, though inside I feel a flicker of nervousness. Whatever answers Ethan Cole gives me next, I sense they will be harder to file away as simple curiosities. When I enter the detention chamber again, Ethan is sitting calmly, as though he has not moved since I last saw him, though I know he has been given food, rest, and even a change of clothing overnight. He looks up and offers a small, familiar smile. "Officer Vorik," he says, "I understand your engineers had a long night." "They did," I admit, taking my seat across from him. "And now my superiors want me to understand why your people build things the way you do, not just what the results are, but the reasoning behind them." Ethan considers this for a moment, then leans forward slightly, resting his arms on the table between us. "Let me tell you a story," he says. "Not about starships, but about something much older, something that might help you understand us better than any technical explanation could." I say nothing, simply waiting, curious despite myself. "A long time ago, before we ever left our home world," he begins, "there was a bridge being built across a wide, dangerous river. The engineers who designed it followed every rule they knew, using the finest calculations available at the time. They built it exactly as their theories told them to. It was elegant, it was precise, and it collapsed within months because their theories, though correct in most situations, failed to account for something they had never considered before. I ask, drawn in despite my attempt to remain professionally detached. The people who rebuilt it did something different, Ethan continues. Instead of relying on one elegant theory, they combined several different approaches, some older, some newer, some that even contradicted each other in small ways. The new bridge was less beautiful. It used more material than necessary. Engineers from other regions criticized it as wasteful and unrefined, but it has stood for generations, surviving storms and floods and disasters that would have destroyed a more perfectly designed structure. I turn this story over in my mind, and slowly I begin to understand the pattern he is describing. You are saying that perfection, in your history, has often been fragile, and imperfection, when built carefully enough, has often been strong. Exactly, Ethan says, and there is something like quiet pride in his voice. We do not always trust a single, perfect solution, because history has taught us that even the best theories eventually meet a situation they were never designed for. So instead of searching endlessly for the one correct answer, we often build several imperfect answers side by side and let them support each other. But surely, I say, there must have been moments when this approach failed you as well, moments where mixing contradictory ideas caused disaster instead of preventing it. Ethan's expression grows more solemn. There were, he admits, many of them in fact. Our history is full of mistakes, failures, ideas that seemed clever but caused real harm before we understood their flaws. We did not arrive at this way of building things through wisdom alone. We arrived at it through loss, through disappointment, through generations of people who refused to stop trying even after they failed. I find myself unexpectedly moved by this admission, and for a moment, I forget that I am speaking to a species we do not yet understand, a potential threat to the empire I have sworn to protect. I am simply listening to someone describe the long, difficult path that shaped who his people have become. Your empire, Ethan says after a pause, studying me carefully, seems to value harmony above all else. A single theory of physics, a single accepted method of engineering, a single correct way of doing things, refined over centuries until it becomes almost sacred. That is true, I admit. Our scholars believe that true understanding leads to true mastery. We do not build things we cannot explain. That is a beautiful way to build a civilization, Ethan says, and I sense no mockery in his words, only genuine respect. But it also means that when you encounter something your theories cannot explain, you may find yourselves without an answer, because you have never needed to prepare for contradiction. His words settle over me like a weight I did not expect to carry. I think of the 3 engine cores aboard his ship, each one operating on principles that should not coexist, and yet somehow supporting one another regardless. I think of the shifting hull readings that confused our finest instruments, not because the ship was hiding something, but because it was built from ideas our own science had never needed to reconcile. May I ask you something personal, I say finally, surprising myself with the question. Ethan tilts his head slightly, curious. Of course. Are you afraid of us? I ask. Of the Empire? Of what we might decide to do with what we have learned about your people? He considers this carefully before answering, and when he speaks, his voice is gentle, without arrogance, without deception. I would be foolish not to respect the size and strength of your empire, Officer Vorik. But I have learned, through the long, difficult history I described to you, that strength built on a single foundation, however impressive, is not always as unshakable as it appears. My people have learned to survive not by matching strength for strength, but by making certain that no single blow, however powerful, can end us completely. The chamber falls silent, and I find myself unable to respond immediately, caught between the instinct to defend the pride of my empire and the quiet, undeniable truth in his words. I do not say this to threaten you, Ethan adds softly, noticing my hesitation. I say this because I believe understanding is more valuable than fear, for both our peoples. If your empire chooses to see us only as a puzzle to be solved by force, I fear you will find the puzzle far more complicated than you expect. But if you choose to understand us, truly understand us, I believe there is room in this galaxy for both our peoples to exist without conflict. I leave the chamber that day carrying more questions than answers, but also carrying a strange, growing respect for the calm, unassuming man who speaks of contradiction and survival as though they were simply facts of life rather than strategies of war. When I deliver my findings to Commander Yeltrin, I do my best to capture not only the technical details, but the deeper philosophy behind them. I describe the story of the bridge, the reasoning behind redundant systems, the quiet acceptance of imperfection in service of resilience. Yeltrin listens without interrupting, his expression unreadable, and when I finish, he is quiet for a long moment before speaking. "You believe him," he says. "It is not quite a question." "I believe," I reply carefully, "that what he has told us is consistent with everything our engineers have found aboard his ship. Whether that is the full truth or only part of it, I cannot say for certain, but I do not believe he is lying to us, Commander. I believe he genuinely does not see the need to." Yeltrin nods slowly, then turns to stare out at the small, unassuming ship still drifting quietly beside our warship, patient, calm, and utterly unafraid. "Send this report to Regional Command as well," he says finally, "and prepare yourself, Vorik. I suspect this will not remain a matter for a single sector for very much longer." That night, alone in my quarters once more, I find myself thinking not of weapons or strategies or the strength of the Empire, but of a bridge built long ago on a distant world, rebuilt not with elegance, but with stubborn, contradictory strength, standing quietly against storms it was never perfectly designed to survive. I wonder, as sleep finally takes me, how many such bridges humanity has built across the stars, and how prepared my empire truly is to face a species that has learned to endure, not through mastery, but through sheer, unyielding persistence. 3 days later, the quiet routine of the Verith Dominion is shattered when a priority transmission arrives, marked with a classification level I have never personally seen used before. Commander Yeltrin reads it in silence, his jaw tightening with each passing line, and when he finally looks up, his expression tells me everything before he even speaks a word. "We are not the only ones," he says quietly. "Reports have come in from 4 other sectors, human ships, small, unremarkable, appearing at the edges of our territory. Some approached patrol vessels the way Ethan Cole approached us, calm, cooperative, unafraid. Others were intercepted more aggressively." My stomach tightens. What happened to those? Yeltrin hesitates before answering. 2 of our warships attempted to disable human vessels that refused immediate boarding. Both attempts failed in ways our officers cannot fully explain. Weapons that should have disabled the smaller ships instead seemed to pass through their systems without lasting effect. One report describes a ship absorbing a direct strike and continuing to function as though nothing had happened at all. I think of the 3 engine cores aboard Ethan Cole's vessel, the strange redundancy built into every system, and I feel a chill settle over me that has nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "They are not hiding their strength," I say slowly, almost to myself. "They simply build things to survive damage, the same way Ethan described to me. It was never a secret weapon. It was the entire philosophy behind everything they make." Yeltrin nods grimly. "Regional Command agrees with your assessment, which is why they have summoned you, personally, to appear before the High Council." I stare at him, certain I have misheard. "Me, sir? A 3rd officer?" "You are the only person in this sector who has spoken with a human directly, at length, and returned with answers instead of more confusion," Yeltrin says. "The Council does not care about rank right now, Vorik. They care about understanding what we are truly facing." Within a day, I find myself aboard a swift courier vessel, traveling toward the heart of the Empire, toward the vast central world where the High Council convenes, a place I have only ever seen in training records and formal ceremonies, never expecting to stand before it myself. The chamber, when I finally enter it, is enormous, a wide circular hall lined with representatives from every major house and division of the empire, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open skepticism. At the center of the chamber sits the High Council itself, 7 senior figures whose authority reaches further than I can properly comprehend. I stand at the designated position, feeling smaller than I ever have in my life, and begin to speak, recounting everything that has happened since the first alarm sounded on the bridge of the Verith Dominion. "You are telling us," interrupts one council member, an older figure with sharp, impatient eyes, "that a single unarmed vessel confused your entire sensor array, and that instead of neutralizing the threat immediately, you allowed its pilot to walk freely through your ship and lecture your officers about bridges and philosophy." I keep my voice steady despite the pointed criticism in his tone. "With respect, Counselor, I do not believe conventional threat assessment applies here. The danger is not in what their ships can do to us directly. It is in how difficult they are to stop, and how little we understand about the reasoning behind their design." Another council member, a calmer woman with a thoughtful expression, leans forward. "Explain this reasoning to us again, officer. In simple terms, we have received technical reports already. We want to understand what you understood, sitting across from this human." I take a breath and repeat, as clearly as I can, the story Ethan Cole told me. The bridge that collapsed because of perfect but incomplete theory, and the second bridge, built imperfectly from contradictory ideas, that has endured for generations. I explain the redundant engine cores, the shifting materials, the calm, unshaken confidence with which Ethan Cole spoke of his people's long history of failure and persistence. When I finish, the chamber falls into a heavy silence. "This is troubling," says a third council member, his voice low and serious. "An empire built on precision and unified understanding, facing a species that thrives specifically in conditions where precision and understanding fail. It is more than troubling," says the skeptical counselor from earlier, though his tone has softened slightly. "If what Officer Vorik describes is accurate across all encounters, then our traditional methods of assessing threat level are inadequate. We have always measured strength by comparing technology directly, weapon for weapon, shield for shield. This species does not appear to build technology for direct comparison. They build it to endure regardless of comparison." A murmur spreads through the chamber, officers and representatives exchanging uneasy glances, and I realize, standing there in the center of it all, that the very foundation of how the Empire evaluates other civilizations is being questioned in real time. The calm woman who spoke earlier turns to address the chamber directly. "We must consider carefully how we proceed. If we treat this species as a conventional threat and respond with conventional force, we may find ourselves in a prolonged conflict against an opponent who does not need to defeat us decisively, only to survive long enough to adapt. If we treat them as harmless due to their unassuming appearance, we may be blind to a resilience that could, over time, outlast our own." "What of diplomacy?" asks another voice from the chamber floor, a younger representative whose name I do not know. "Officer Vorik has described a species that speaks calmly, offers explanations freely, and shows no immediate hostility. Perhaps our first approach should not be one of confrontation at all." The skeptical counselor scoffs quietly. "Diplomacy assumes shared values, shared understanding. How do we negotiate with a species whose engineers cannot even agree with each other on the correct way to build a single ship?" "Perhaps," I say, surprising myself by speaking without being directly addressed, "that is precisely why diplomacy might succeed with them, counselor. A people who have learned to accept contradiction and disagreement among themselves may be more willing to accept it in others as well." The chamber turns to look at me, and for a moment I fear I have overstepped, but the calm woman on the council nods slowly, considering my words seriously rather than dismissing them. "Officer Vorik raises an interesting point," she says. "A species built on rigid, unified theory, such as our own, often struggles to accept disagreement gracefully. A species built on centuries of contradiction may have developed exactly the kind of patience and flexibility required for careful negotiation." The debate continues late into the day, voices rising and falling, arguments for caution, for aggression, for patience, for immediate containment, none of them reaching a clear consensus. I stand through most of it, answering questions when asked, offering what insight I can, watching as the great and powerful figures of the Empire struggle to agree on how to respond to something as simple and as complicated as one calm human pilot named Ethan Cole. Eventually, as the session nears its end, the eldest member of the council, a quiet, weathered figure who has said very little throughout the entire debate, finally speaks, his voice carrying a weight that silences the chamber instantly. "We have built this empire," he says slowly, "on the belief that understanding leads to mastery, and mastery leads to strength. For centuries this belief has served us well, but today we are faced with a species that appears to have built their entire existence on the opposite belief, that mastery is fragile, and true strength lies in the ability to endure what you do not fully understand." He pauses, letting his words settle over the chamber. "I do not know yet whether this makes them a threat or simply a mystery," he continues, "but I believe it would be a grave mistake to respond to this discovery with either dismissal or immediate hostility. We must observe further, we must understand more deeply, and above all, we must resist the temptation to force this new species into a category simply because the uncertainty makes us uncomfortable." The Council eventually agrees, reluctantly, to a policy of cautious observation, careful diplomacy, and continued study, while quietly reinforcing military readiness along every border where human vessels have been encountered. It is not the decisive resolution some in the chamber clearly wanted, but it is, I sense, the wisest choice available given how little we truly understand. As I leave the chamber that evening, exhausted from the weight of the day, I am approached by an aide who informs me that Commander Yeltrin has requested my immediate return to the Vareth Dominion, where, apparently, Ethan Cole has made an unusual request of his own. He is asked to speak with me one final time, before Regional Command decides whether to allow his ship safe passage to continue its original journey. I board the courier vessel back to my ship with a strange, uneasy feeling settling over me, a sense that the conversation waiting for me is not simply another exchange of information, but something closer to a final, quiet warning, one that I suspect very few people in the vast, powerful empire I serve are truly prepared to hear. The Vareth Dominion feels different when I return, though nothing about it has physically changed. The corridors are the same, the hum of the engine steady and familiar, yet something in the air feels tighter, more alert, as though the entire crew has absorbed the same uneasy weight I carried out of the council chamber. Commander Yeltrin meets me at the docking bay himself, which surprises me, given how rarely he leaves the bridge during active watch. "There is a complication," he says quietly, walking briskly beside me through the corridor. "While you were away, a fleet detachment from the Border Authority arrived, acting on orders separate from Regional Command. Their commander believes the human vessel should be seized outright, its technology studied by force, rather than cooperation." My stomach drops. Does Regional Command know about this? "They know now," Yeltrin says grimly, "but the detachment commander, a man named Halvrik, is not easily overruled once he has made a decision. He believes hesitation with an unknown species is a weakness the Empire cannot afford, and he has already begun preparations to disable Ethan Cole's ship and take it under full military control." I feel a surge of alarm that catches me off guard. That would be a mistake. Ethan Cole came to us peacefully. If we respond with force after everything we have learned— "I know," Yeltrin interrupts, his voice tight, "which is why I need you to speak with Ethan Cole immediately, before Halvrik's detachment finishes its preparations. If there is any warning you can offer him, any chance to avoid this turning into something none of us can control, I need you to find it now." We move quickly through the ship, and when we reach the detention chamber, I find Ethan standing calmly near the small viewport, watching the distant shapes of additional warships gathering in the void outside, their formation unmistakably aggressive despite the emptiness of space around them. "Officer Vorik," he says without turning, his voice as steady as ever. "I see your empire has grown more suspicious of me since your journey to the council." "Not the empire as a whole," I say quickly, moving to stand beside him. "A separate detachment, acting without full authorization. Their commander intends to seize your ship by force." Ethan is quiet for a moment, watching the gathering ships with an expression I cannot quite read, something between resignation and quiet disappointment. "I suspected something like this might happen eventually," he says softly. "Fear often moves faster than patience, even in the most disciplined organizations." "You do not seem surprised," I say, "or afraid." "I am not afraid," he replies simply, "but I am concerned, Officer Vorik. Not for myself, but for what happens next, for both our peoples, if this moment is allowed to unfold the way Commander Halvrik intends." Before I can respond, the ship's alert system activates, a calm but firm voice announcing that unidentified vessels have begun approaching on an intercept course, their weapons systems active and armed. I turn to Ethan urgently. "Whatever you can do, whatever explanation, whatever warning you can offer, now is the time." Ethan nods slowly, then reaches into his jacket and retrieves a small, plain device, no larger than the palm of his hand, offering it to me without hesitation. "Give this to Commander Yeltrin," he says. "Tell him to broadcast the signal it generates toward the approaching fleet on an open channel before anyone fires." I hesitate only a moment before taking it, trusting the calm certainty in his voice, and rush back toward the bridge with Commander Yeltrin close behind me. On the bridge, tension crackles through the air as officers watch the approaching fleet close the distance on the main view screen. Commander Halvrik's flagship broadcasts a formal notice of intent to seize the human vessel under Imperial Security Authority, his voice cold and unwavering. "Do it," Yeltrin orders, taking the device from my hands and passing it quickly to the communications officer. "Broadcast whatever signal this generates, immediately, on an open channel." The communications officer complies, and a moment later, a strange, layered tone spreads across the open channel, unlike anything I have heard before, neither a weapon nor a simple message, but something that seems to shift and repeat in patterns too complex to follow easily. For a tense moment, nothing happens, and I fear the gesture has failed entirely. Then, across the fleet's shared display, something remarkable occurs. Every ship in Halvrik's detachment suddenly displays identical readings, not of weakness, but of full, unmistakable clarity. Every hidden redundancy within Ethan's vessel laid bare simultaneously. Every strange contradiction our scanners struggled with now presented plainly, openly, without concealment. "What is this?" Halvrik's voice demands over the channel, sharp with confusion. Commander Yeltrin steps forward to respond, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Commander Halvrik, the human vessel has just voluntarily revealed the complete schematics of its systems, every redundancy, every contradiction, without concealment or deception. This is not the action of a species preparing for conflict. This is the action of a species choosing transparency over confrontation." There is a long pause over the channel, and I imagine Halvrik studying the data now displayed plainly before him, the sheer scale of engineering philosophy laid bare, no longer mysterious, simply overwhelming in its honest complexity. "This changes nothing," Halvrik finally responds, though his voice carries less certainty than before. "A revealed weapon is still a weapon." "With respect, Commander," Yeltrin replies carefully, "I do not believe you are looking at a weapon at all. I believe you are looking at a species that has chosen to show you exactly how difficult they would be to defeat, specifically so that you would choose not to try." Another long silence follows, and I watch the tactical display closely, the gathered fleet hesitating, weapons still armed but no longer advancing. Slowly, reluctantly, Halvrik's formation begins to withdraw, falling back from intercept range, the immediate crisis easing without a single shot fired. Regional Command, alerted swiftly to the incident, issues an urgent order confirming the earlier Council decision, formally instructing all border forces to cease aggressive action against human vessels until further diplomatic protocols are established. Commander Halvrik's detachment is recalled under formal review, and the tension that gripped the bridge slowly begins to dissolve into something closer to exhausted relief. I return to the detention chamber to find Ethan Cole exactly where I left him, calm, unshaken, watching the retreating fleet through the viewport with quiet satisfaction. "It worked," I say, still catching my breath from the tension of the encounter. "I hoped it would," Ethan replies. "Sometimes the best way to prevent a conflict is not to hide your strength, but to show it so completely that there is nothing left to guess about, and therefore nothing left to fear enough to attack." I study him for a long moment, understanding now more clearly than ever the deep and unusual wisdom behind everything his people have built. "You are not simply resilient because your technology is complicated," I say slowly. "You are resilient because you have learned to be honest about your weaknesses, trusting that your strength lies in the whole rather than in any single hidden advantage." Ethan smiles, and for the first time there is something like quiet pride in his expression. "That is exactly it, Officer Vorik. We have never needed to hide what we are. We have only needed to endure long enough for others to understand it." In the days that follow, formal communication channels are established between the Empire and Earth's governing council, careful, cautious, but undeniably real. Ethan Cole is finally granted safe passage to continue his original journey, his ship departing the Verith Dominion the same way it arrived, calm, unhurried, and entirely unafraid. Before he leaves, he finds me one final time in the docking bay, offering a simple, friendly nod. "Thank you, Officer Vorik," he says, "for listening, when so many others might have simply reacted." "Thank you," I reply, "for trusting us enough to explain, rather than simply defending yourself in silence." He smiles once more, then turns and boards his ship, and within moments, the small, unremarkable vessel drifts away from us, disappearing quietly into the vastness of space, leaving behind an empire forever changed by the quiet, contradictory strength of a species we had once dismissed as unremarkable. In the months that follow, the Grand Vurith Empire formally reclassifies humanity, not as a lesser civilization to be catalogued and controlled, nor as an immediate threat to be neutralized, but as something entirely new in our historical records, a species defined not by the elegance of their solutions, but by the sheer, unyielding persistence of their survival. I am promoted shortly afterward, assigned to a newly formed division dedicated entirely to understanding humanity, a task I suspect will occupy scholars and officers for generations to come. And as I sit at my new station, reviewing reports of continued encounters between our peoples, cautious, respectful, occasionally still tense, but no longer defined by fear alone, I find myself returning often to the memory of that first calm voice over the comm system, offering nothing but honesty in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. We built our empire on understanding, on mastery, on the belief that true strength comes from knowing exactly how something works. Humanity, it seems, built their survival on something quieter, something harder to measure, but perhaps, in the end, far more difficult to defeat. They did not need to understand every rule of the universe to make their technology work. They only needed to refuse to stop trying, generation after generation, until survival itself became their greatest and most unshakable invention. And as the Empire watches the stars more carefully now, aware at last of just how much we still do not understand, I find myself wondering, quietly, whether the greatest lesson humanity has taught us is not about their technology at all, but about the quiet danger of ever assuming we have already learned everything the galaxy has left to teach.